Amara Johnson rounded the corner on the second floor of Sterling Heights Academy, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her earbuds were in, and Kendrick Lamar's lyrics fueled her brisk pace. AP Calculus in 5 minutes, a quiz she couldn't afford to fail. Zero time for distractions. But fate, or maybe something messier, had other plans. There, standing dead center in the hallway, like some sort of cliché villain, was Preston Langston. Amara could see him before she even turned the corner. He was hard to miss. At 6 feet 2 inches, with meticulously styled blonde hair and muscles that screamed years of football practice, Preston was the school's self-proclaimed king. He wore his arrogance like a second skin, his every movement oozing the confidence that came from being born into privilege. He was the kind of guy who thought his last name mattered more than the first impression you made, and he never hesitated to remind everyone of it. Well, well, Preston drawled as Amara came into view, leaning lazily against a row of cherrywood lockers. His tone was thick with mockery. Look what we have here. You sure you're in the right place, Johnson? The hallway around them seemed to hold its breath. Students slowed their pace, some even stopping completely. Amara could feel the eyes on her, some curious, some nervous, but all waiting for her response. No one would intervene. Sterling Heights had unwritten rules. Rule number 1, if Preston Langston picked a target, you stayed out of it. Amara's fingers tightened around her backpack strap. She wasn't in the mood. Not today. Move, she said, her tone calm, measured. I don't have time for your nonsense. Preston's grin widened, his eyes narrowing with the kind of amusement that made everyone else cringe. He took a step closer, his frame towering over hers, casting a shadow that felt all too familiar. You think you can talk to me like that? He sneered, his words dripping with contempt. You don't belong here, Johnson. This school isn't for people like you. With a sudden shove, Preston pushed her harder than necessary. It wasn't enough to knock her down, but it was enough to send a message, a warning, a challenge, a mistake. Gasps echoed through the hallway as students whipped out their phones like magic wands. This wasn't just bullying anymore. It was entertainment. The scene had become a spectacle, and Amara could feel the weight of all those eyes on her. No one moved. No one dared. They were waiting for her to back down. But Amara? She didn't flinch. She exhaled slowly, tilting her head, her dark eyes locking with Preston's. She could feel his anger, raw, palpable, but she was unfazed. You really don't want to do this, she said, her voice low, almost dangerous. Preston chuckled, stepping back as if preparing for some kind of victory. Or what? You gonna cry to a teacher? He shoved her again, harder this time, the force making her stumble slightly. Amara sighed, a sound that wasn't one of fear, but resignation. That was it. He had pushed her too far. Without warning, she dropped her backpack in one swift motion, her hands flying out to grab his wrist. In a seamless move, she pivoted her hips, flipped him over her shoulder, and sent him crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. The hallway went completely silent. By lunchtime, everyone at Sterling Heights Academy knew what had happened. There wasn't a single student who hadn't seen the video. Amara flipping Preston Langston was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, every platform, every feed. The caption read, "Rich kid gets wrecked by black girl at elite private school." It spread like wildfire, and within hours Amara had become the most talked about person in school, maybe even the most famous. At first, the reactions were a mix of disbelief and admiration. Yo, did you see that flip? Someone shouted as they walked past Amara, the clip still fresh in their mind. She's a ninja, another person added. I need to learn how to do that. But for Amara, the attention was surreal. People who had never acknowledged her existence before were now stopping her in the hallways, asking to sit with her at lunch. Students who had once treated her like she was invisible now watched her every move, some with wide eyes and others with a nervous respect. Amara couldn't help but feel a little dizzy from the whirlwind of it all. One minute, she was just a student trying to survive the pressure of school. The next, she was a viral sensation, the new center of attention. She didn't know how to handle the sudden shift. She wasn't used to it. Preston, on the other hand, was furious. He wasn't humiliated. Not at all. No, Preston Langston didn't get humiliated. But his pride, his reputation, that was a different story. And he wasn't about to let it slide. The next morning, Sterling Heights Academy was still buzzing with the aftermath of Amara's viral victory. Amara could feel the weight of the stares following her every move. Some students admired her, others feared her, but there were those whose eyes seemed to hold something darker. Resentment, perhaps, or something closer to anger. It was hard to tell, but Amara didn't have the energy to care. She had enough on her plate as it was. Her phone buzzed during fourth period, a text from an anonymous number. She didn't need to open the message to know who it was. Preston Langston. The text was simple, almost too casual. Meet me at the gym after school. Let's settle this. Amara frowned, her fingers hovering over the screen. She hadn't expected him to let it go, but she also hadn't expected him to want a rematch so soon. She read the message again, and then, without hesitation, typed back, "I'm there." The rest of the day dragged on. The whispers and glances didn't stop, but Amara kept her focus. By the next morning, the entire school seemed to be on edge. Sterling Heights Academy was still buzzing from Amara's viral takedown of Preston Langston, but the reactions were starting to shift. While some students were still fascinated by her, others, especially Preston's loyal followers, were starting to whisper. She could feel the tension thick in the air. As she walked to class, she caught snippets of conversations, each one seeming to circle around her like a predator. "Did you hear? Preston's not done with her. I can't believe she really did that. He's going to make her regret it." Amara ignored it. She'd faced worse. But then came the message. It was a simple text from an anonymous number, but Amara could already guess who it was. Preston. She wasn't even shocked. The message read, "Meet me at the gym after school. Let's settle this." It didn't take much to figure out that Preston wasn't just going to let this go. She had humiliated him in front of the whole school, and now he wanted revenge. The more she thought about it, the more Amara realized how ridiculous it all was. This wasn't about respect. It wasn't about fear. This was about his pride, and that was exactly why she wasn't going to back down. As the day dragged on, she found herself almost anticipating the moment. This was it, the showdown. She wasn't scared. She was ready. But part of her also wondered, would this be the end, or would it only escalate further? The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Amara grabbed her backpack, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. It wasn't the kind of weight she was used to, the stress of an exam or the pressure of being late to class. No, this felt different. This was a challenge, and she was walking straight into it. She made her way to the gym, her steps steady, the noise of students heading out to their cars fading behind her. The gym doors loomed ahead, and she couldn't help but notice the eerie silence in the hallway. It felt like the whole school was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When she reached the door, she paused for a moment, hand on the handle. Then she pushed it open. The gym was vast, echoing with the faint sound of sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The high ceiling seemed to amplify the emptiness, and at first it looked like no one was there. But Amara knew better. A voice broke the silence. "Big mistake coming here, Johnson." Amara turned to see Preston stepping out from behind the bleachers, flanked by three of his friends, Jace, Ethan, and Marcus. The four of them stood there like some bad parody of a villain gang, all towering over her. Preston grinned, his teeth flashing white against his tan skin, and Amara could almost taste the arrogance radiating off him. "You must really be scared of me," Amara said, crossing her arms and standing tall, refusing to back down. Preston's eyes narrowed, his grin turning into a sneer. "This isn't about fear. It's about respect." The gym was cavernous, the air still, as if waiting for the clash to begin. Amara stood in the center of the polished floor, her sneakers squeaking faintly with each movement. The tension was palpable, a heaviness that pressed down on her chest, but she wasn't afraid. She had dealt with worse. "Big mistake coming here, Johnson." Preston's voice cut through the silence, dripping with disdain as he emerged from behind the bleachers, flanked by his three loyal followers, Jace, Ethan, and Marcus. They stood there like some kind of execution squad, all towering over her. Preston, with his signature smirk, looked like he thought he already had the upper hand. Amara took a slow, deliberate breath, eyes locked on Preston. She wasn't intimidated. She knew how this worked. She knew the game. "You must really be scared of me," Amara said, her tone steady, her posture relaxed, almost casual. She didn't flinch when Preston took a step closer. She wasn't here to play by his rules. She had her own. Preston's eyes flashed with irritation, and his smile faltered. "Shut up!" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. He took another step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. The muscles in his arms flexed, his body coiled like a spring, ready to explode. Jace, who was the tallest of Preston's group, stepped forward, a sneer forming on his face. He moved like a brawler, bulky and slow. He lunged at Amara, trying to grab her by the shoulders. Amara, however, was ready. She sidestepped with ease, using his own momentum against him, sending him crashing to the floor in one fluid motion. He groaned as he hit the ground, the sound of his body slamming against the hardwood echoing in the silence. Ethan charged next, a look of fury in his eyes. He tried to grab Amara from behind, but she was already moving, anticipating his move. With a quick twist, she drove her elbow into his ribs. He gasped, doubling over, the wind knocked out of him. He staggered back, clutching his side as if trying to catch his breath. But it was too late. Marcus, the third of Preston's loyal crew, hesitated. His eyes flicked between Amara and his friends, unsure whether to jump in or retreat. That hesitation was all Amara needed. In a split second, she pivoted and kicked him square in the chest. He flew backward like a rag doll, crashing to the floor with a heavy thud. Now there were only two left standing, Preston and Amara. Preston's face was twisted with rage, his earlier cocky demeanor gone. All that remained was a raw, unrestrained fury. He lunged at her, throwing wild punches. He wasn't thinking. He was reacting, and it was clear he had no control over his anger. Amara dodged easily, stepping aside with fluid grace. She let him tire himself out. He swung again, this time faster, but she was quicker. As his fist whizzed past her face, she saw the opening. With a swift move, she landed a powerful kick to his gut, the force knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. Before he could recover, Amara grabbed him by the collar, yanking him toward her. In one smooth motion, she slammed him to the floor. The impact was brutal. Preston lay there stunned, gasping for air. His pride had shattered, his arrogance deflated. Amara crouched next to him, her voice low and steady, but with a lethal edge. "Don't ever touch me again." The gym was silent after the fight, the echoes of Preston's fall still reverberating in the air. As Amara stood over him, she could feel the weight of the moment settle in. It wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about sending a message. The kind of message that people like Preston didn't expect. She wasn't here to be anyone's punching bag. Amara grabbed her backpack and slung it over her shoulder, stepping over Preston like he was just another obstacle in her path. The crowd that had gathered outside the gym doors erupted into applause, a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and genuine admiration. The fight had been brutal, but it had been quick, efficient. And now, for the first time in a long while, Amara felt a sense of power. As she walked through the halls of Sterling Heights, it wasn't just the usual stares that followed her. This time there was respect, real respect. People moved aside for her, whispered in awe, and even a few dared to offer a nod or a smile. Just yesterday, she was the quiet girl who blended into the background, unnoticed. Now she was the girl who had taken down the school's biggest bully in front of everyone. But that respect wasn't universal. Amara could feel the lingering eyes of Preston's group, his loyal followers, watching her every move. She knew they weren't done. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about revenge. But as she walked through the corridors, Amara's resolve only strengthened. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her. Not now. The next morning, the atmosphere at Sterling Heights Academy had shifted. Amara could feel it in the air, the weight of every whisper, every glance. She was no longer the quiet girl from the back of the class. She was the new queen, the one who had stood up to Preston Langston, the one who'd humiliated him in front of the entire school. She was walking with a new kind of confidence, a power she hadn't realized she'd possessed until now. But with that power came a new kind of pressure. People were watching her, some in awe, some in fear, and others still in disbelief. She caught a few people talking as she passed, words like, "She really did it," and "She's unstoppable." But it wasn't all admiration. There were whispers too, rumors about what Preston and his crew were planning next, how they wouldn't let this go. At lunch, Amara sat alone, the familiar feeling of isolation creeping in despite the shift in her social standing. People had started to talk to her, but only because they saw an opportunity to align with the victor. She wasn't naive enough to think that everyone now wanted to be her friend for the right reasons. She wasn't here for false friendships or hollow words of admiration. And then, there he was, Preston. He wasn't looking for an apology or an excuse. He was looking for a fight. Amara caught sight of him across the cafeteria, his face a mixture of fury and something darker, something deeper. He was plotting his next move. Amara didn't look away. She wasn't afraid. She didn't need to be. The hallway buzzed with energy, but it wasn't the usual chatter Amara had grown accustomed to. No, today the air was thick with something else. People weren't just talking about their homework or the latest gossip. They were talking about her. Amara could feel their eyes on her as she walked to her next class. Some curious, some respectful, but others uncertain. There was a new weight to her every step. It wasn't just the attention she'd garnered after her fight with Preston. It was something deeper. She had changed the narrative, and now everyone in Sterling Heights was watching to see what she'd do next. As she entered class, she was greeted with nods of recognition. A few people even smiled at her, hesitant at first, like they weren't sure how to approach the girl who had flipped the school's top bully onto his back. Amara didn't smile back. She just nodded and took her seat, her mind focused on something else. The peace she'd earned after the fight didn't last long. Even as she tried to concentrate, her thoughts kept drifting to the whispers, the way people looked at her now, like they couldn't quite figure her out. She had won, yes, but at what cost? Would she now be the target of more than just Preston's anger? She couldn't help but wonder how far he would go to regain his position at the top. As the bell rang to signal the end of class, Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from one of her friends. Instead, it was an unknown number. "We're not done yet." Amara's fingers tightened around her phone as she read the message again, a chill running down her spine. "We're not done yet." It was from an unknown number, but she didn't need to guess who it was. Preston. The game wasn't over, and he wasn't going to let her win that easily. As she tucked the phone back into her pocket, the weight of the situation settled deeper in her chest. She knew Preston was angry. She'd known that from the moment she took him down in the gym. But this was different. This wasn't just about his pride anymore. This was about power. He wasn't used to losing, and now that he was willing to do anything to take back control. The rest of the day felt like walking through a minefield. Her every move was scrutinized, every glance felt heavy. Some people still whispered to her, admiring her for standing up to Preston, while others, particularly those who were close to Preston, watched her like hawks. Amara couldn't help but feel like she was trapped in the eye of a storm, with nowhere to run. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Amara gathered her things quickly. The message loomed in her mind. She couldn't ignore it. She had to face whatever Preston was planning next. She wasn't afraid. No, not anymore. She'd already won once, and she could do it again. But deep down, Amara knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about more than just her reputation. It was about everything she stood for. Amara had barely made it through the front door of her house when her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text message. There was a voicemail. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, but she had a sinking feeling in her stomach. She pressed play, and the voice that filled the receiver was unmistakable. "You've made a big mistake, Johnson." Preston's voice was sharp, low, and filled with simmering rage. "You think you've won? You think you've got this school wrapped around your finger now? Well, you're wrong. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The message ended abruptly, and Amara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She stood frozen in the entryway, gripping her phone tightly. She knew Preston wouldn't go down without a fight, but hearing his voice like that, it was different. This wasn't just about getting back at her. He was trying to break her. She had expected retaliation, but not like this. There were no more subtle games or taunts in the hallway. This felt personal. Over the next few days, things at school began to take a turn. Preston's supporters, the ones who had stood by him all along, started to distance themselves from Amara, even going so far as to whisper behind her back. She couldn't ignore the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface, something that would explode if she wasn't careful. It was clear Preston wasn't done. He was playing a different game now, and Amara knew that if she didn't act fast, she might just lose the one thing she had gained: control. The days that followed were filled with tension. Amara could feel the shift in the air whenever she walked into a room. The whispers were no longer just idle chatter. They were filled with intent. Students who had once smiled at her now looked at her with wary eyes, almost as if they were afraid to be associated with her. Some had even started avoiding her altogether, afraid of being caught in the crossfire between her and Preston. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. She opened it quickly, hoping it was from one of her friends, but once again, it was Preston. "You think I'm scared of you? You're nothing. Don't forget where you stand. You won't last here long." The words were cryptic, but the threat was clear. Amara gritted her teeth and tossed her phone onto her bed. This wasn't just about proving she was stronger. This was about survival. She wasn't going to let Preston push her into the corner. At lunch the next day, she was alone at her usual table. It had become a habit, but now it felt different. She felt exposed, like every set of eyes was fixed on her, waiting for her to crack. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out what Preston's next move would be. He was clever, ruthless when it came to getting his way, and now that he was cornered, he was dangerous. Amara had to prepare herself. This was no longer just a fight to prove a point. This was war. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her eyes scanning the room. The weight of everything pressing down on her felt heavier than usual. It had been days since Preston's last message, but she knew that something was coming. The silence was too loud. He was plotting, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back, and she couldn't afford to be unprepared. She stared at her phone, its screen dim in the low light of her room. The anonymous texts, the whispers at school, the subtle threats. It was all starting to take a toll on her. But Amara was no stranger to pressure. She had always managed to keep her cool, to stay focused, and she wasn't about to let Preston make her lose that. Amara stood up and paced across the room, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She couldn't afford to underestimate Preston, not anymore. He wasn't just angry, he was desperate. His loss of power at Sterling Heights had shaken him to his core, and he would do anything to regain it. She had to be ready for whatever came next. Her thoughts kept returning to that day in the gym, the moment she had taken Preston down. It had felt like victory then, but now it seemed more like a beginning of something much larger than she had anticipated. The door creaked open, and Amara's younger brother, Malik, poked his head in. "You okay?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Amara forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." Malik didn't buy it. He stepped inside, leaning against the doorframe. "You've been off lately. What's going on?" She exhaled slowly. "I think Preston's planning something bigger, and I don't know if I'm ready for it." Malik raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from concern to determination. "You've got this. You've been through worse, right? You don't back down from anyone. Just make sure you stay one step ahead of him. Don't give him a chance to get to you." Amara nodded slowly, appreciating her brother's unwavering belief in her. Malik had always been her rock, her voice of reason when the world felt too heavy. But this time, it wasn't just about facing off with a bully. This was about survival, about proving that she could hold her ground in a world that was constantly trying to knock her down. "I know," she said softly, "but something tells me this won't be over easily. Preston won't stop until he feels like he's got control again, and I can't let him." The air in her room felt charged, as though every word was amplifying the reality of what was to come. She couldn't shake the feeling that Preston was planning something more dangerous than just a rematch. He was playing for keeps now. Amara stood up and walked over to her desk, pulling out a notebook and flipping through the pages. She'd been jotting down everything she knew about Preston, his habits, his friends, the way he operated, It was time to strategize. If he was coming for her, she needed to be ready. Just then, her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number, but this time, it wasn't Preston. It was a different message, something that would change everything. You don't know who you're dealing with. Preston isn't the only one who wants you gone. Amara's heart pounded as she stared at the text on her phone. You don't know who you're dealing with. Preston isn't the only one who wants you gone. The words were a cold shock, more unsettling than anything Preston had sent her so far. The message didn't just hint at retaliation. It promised it. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer just about Preston's bruised ego. There was something bigger at play, something darker than she had anticipated. She leaned back against her desk, mind racing. Who could it be? Who else was after her? Amara replayed every encounter she'd had with Preston and his crew, every moment where something felt off. Had someone else been pulling the strings? Was there an unseen force behind Preston's behavior? The idea gnawed at her. This wasn't just a high school rivalry anymore. It was a game with stakes that were getting higher by the day. She tried to shake off the unease. One thing was clear. Whoever this was, they didn't know her well. She wasn't someone who cowered in fear. But this new threat was different. She wasn't just fighting against a bully. She was fighting against a force that seemed willing to go to any lengths to tear her down. The hours passed slowly, but her resolve was clear. She needed to prepare. Amara wasn't going to let anyone control her destiny. She couldn't afford to back down now. When the final bell rang the next day, signaling the end of another school day, Amara knew the confrontation was imminent. Preston, or whoever was behind this new threat, was about to make their move. The calm before the storm was over. Amara took a deep breath as she walked toward the gym after school, her mind focused and sharp. The halls were quieter now, students filing out for the day, leaving the school in an eerie stillness. She could feel the tension building with every step. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in her bones. She had no idea who was waiting for her, but she was ready for whatever was coming. As she approached the gym, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. She hesitated for only a moment before answering. Hello? Amara's voice was steady, though a small knot of apprehension formed in her stomach. You think you can just walk around like nothing's happening? It was Preston, his voice laced with venom. You think I'm done with you? I'm not done. Not by a long shot. Amara tightened her grip on the phone, her other hand clutching the strap of her backpack. You've made your point, Preston, but I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever. A pause. Then his voice dropped lower, more sinister. You don't know who's helping me now, Amara. You're just a pawn in a bigger game. And when this is all over, you'll be the one who's forgotten. The line went dead. Amara's heart raced. There was no doubt in her mind now. This wasn't just about her and Preston anymore. Someone else was involved, someone powerful. She couldn't shake the fear creeping into her thoughts, but she wouldn't let it show. With one final glance toward the gym doors, Amara pushed them open, stepping inside. The game had just changed, and she was walking into the heart of the storm. Amara stepped into the gym, the scent of polished wood and the faint echo of bouncing basketballs filling the air. The silence felt different now, heavier. This wasn't just a place for sports anymore. It had become a battleground. She scanned the room, eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The gym was empty, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. A sound behind her made her spin around. The gym doors slammed shut with a force that sent a shiver down her spine. Preston stood there, no longer alone. Two figures emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim light. Amara's heart skipped a beat. They weren't just Preston's usual lackeys. These were new faces, menacing faces. This is it, Preston's voice echoed across the gym, colder than before. You're in my world now, Amara. The two strangers flanked Preston, their expressions unreadable. Amara had seen enough to know this wasn't just a rematch. It was a setup. Preston had brought in reinforcements, and not just any reinforcements. These guys were different, taller, broader, and the way they moved, calculated, deliberate. It made her stomach tighten with unease. She stood tall, though, refusing to show any fear. "You think these guys are going to help you?" Amara's voice was steady, but her mind raced. "You're still not getting away with it, Preston. Not this time." Preston smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "You don't know what you're up against." His words felt like a warning, a prelude to something bigger. "This isn't just about you and me anymore." Amara's pulse quickened, but she refused to let the fear show. She had faced Preston before, and no matter how much backup he brought, it wouldn't change the fact that she had already taken him down once. But these new guys, there was something about them that made her uneasy. They weren't like Jace, Ethan, or Marcus. There was an intensity in their eyes, a level of control that sent a warning through her. They weren't just here to intimidate, they were here to fight. Preston took a step forward, his voice lowering to a menacing growl. "You think I'm just going to let you walk away after what you did to me? You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. I'm not going to let that slide." Amara stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Then come at me," she challenged, her voice unwavering. "But you're going to need more than just these two to take me down, and you're not going to break me." Preston's eyes flared with rage. He was losing control, and that made him more dangerous. He motioned for the two men beside him to move. Without a word, they stepped forward, positioning themselves between Amara and the exit. They were closing in on her, boxing her in. She knew she had to make a choice. She couldn't let them take the first move, not this time. With lightning speed, Amara charged, her body moving with precision as she lunged at the closest of the two strangers. A swift knee to his gut brought him to a halt. But as he staggered back, the second man grabbed her by the arm, pulling her off balance. Amara's mind raced as the second man grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. She couldn't let them overpower her. Not now. Not after everything she had fought for. With a quick twist of her body, she yanked her arm free, using his own force against him to send him stumbling forward. She didn't waste a second. Before he could recover, Amara swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. She didn't even look at him as he struggled to get up. Her focus was entirely on Preston, who was standing there watching with a look of fury etched across his face. His pride was on the line, and Amara could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for dominance in the school anymore. He was fighting for his sense of control, for the image he had spent so long building. But Amara wasn't afraid. She wasn't that girl anymore. She'd proved herself once before, and now she was going to prove it again. She took a step forward, her stance steady and confident, as if she had already won. "Is this really all you've got, Preston?" she taunted, her voice cool, laced with disdain. "You bring in these thugs to intimidate me? You think that's going to make me back down?" Preston's face twisted with rage. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped. "This is bigger than you. It's bigger than this school. I don't lose, Amara. Not like this." Amara took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Then let's see how far you're willing to go." Preston's expression darkened, and for a moment, Amara could see the uncertainty in his eyes, buried beneath the anger. He was losing control, and that made him more dangerous. The tension in the gym crackled as Preston clenched his fists, stepping forward with determination. His eyes were locked on hers, his voice low and threatening. "You don't know what you're messing with, Amara," he growled, his words cutting through the silence. "I'll make sure you regret this." Before she could react, he lunged at her, his movement swift and desperate. Amara dodged his attack, sidestepping him with ease, but she could feel the heat of his fury in the air. This was no longer just a fight for dominance at Sterling Heights. This was about his broken pride, his need to prove that he was still in control. The two men, who had barely recovered from her earlier moves, tried to move in to help Preston, but Amara was ready. With a quick, fluid motion, she spun around, delivering a powerful roundhouse kick to the first guy's chest, sending him crashing against the bleachers. The second one hesitated, and that moment of uncertainty was all Amara needed. She drove her elbow into his ribs, knocking the wind out of him. He crumpled to the ground with a groan. Amara stood tall, her chest heaving from the effort, but her expression was unwavering. She turned back to Preston, whose face was now flushed with humiliation. His arrogance had been shattered, and for the first time, he was truly vulnerable. "You're done," Amara said, her voice calm but cutting. You've lost. The gym was silent, the echoes of the fight still hanging in the air. Preston lay on the floor, his body defeated and his pride in tatters. Amara stood over him, her breathing steady, her gaze unwavering. The crowd that had gathered around the gym door watched in stunned silence. They had seen it all, her strength, her determination, her resilience. It wasn't just about the physical fight anymore. This was the final test of who she was. Amara took a deep breath and stepped away from Preston, her boots clicking on the polished floor. She didn't need to say another word to him. His defeat was obvious, written across his bruised face and broken demeanor. The power he once held over Sterling Heights had crumbled, and it wasn't coming back. The students who had watched in awe slowly began to murmur amongst themselves, some hesitant, others excited. For the first time, the atmosphere at Sterling Heights Academy felt different. Amara had changed the game. She had shown everyone that strength wasn't just about who could intimidate the loudest. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity and refusing to back down. Amara turned to face the crowd, her voice calm but strong as she addressed them all. You've all watched what happened. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Respect is earned, not taken by force, and I'm not going anywhere. Her words resonated through the gym, and the tension in the air began to dissipate. Amara had earned her place, not just in the halls of Sterling Heights, but in the hearts of those who had once been afraid to stand beside her. This was her victory. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, but not from fear. The adrenaline was still there, but now it was replaced with something stronger. Clarity. She had fought for more than just her reputation. She had fought for herself, for her future, for everyone who had ever been overlooked or silenced. As the murmurs grew louder and whispers of her strength spread through the gym, she felt a new kind of power. She was no longer the girl hiding in the background. She had taken control of her destiny, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. Preston remained on the floor, struggling to gather his bearings, his face flushed with humiliation. He didn't move to get up, his body a silent testament to how far he had fallen. Amara had expected him to lash out, to make one last attempt to regain his dominance. But instead, he simply lay there, defeated. It was as though the fight had drained him, not just physically, but emotionally. A few of his old followers had begun to drift away, unsure of how to react. But most of the crowd had already turned their attention to Amara. They no longer saw the quiet girl who kept her head down. They saw someone who had the courage to challenge the status quo, someone who had rewritten the rules. Amara didn't need to look at Preston again. She had won. She had won in a way that didn't require cruelty or revenge. It was a victory of will, of standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. As she turned toward the exit, a few students stepped aside, giving her space, but also nodding in recognition. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen.